Good afternoon, good afternoon. About ready to start. My favorite delegate, Mount Sickles, I'm about to start. I know I'm your favorite. Turn around, Mount Sickles. Behave yourself now. We can be friends. Let me thank everybody for coming out first. This is great. What we're going to do first, we are going to introduce the members who are here. And let me first thank all of y'all who are here. And we're going to have a 2-hour meeting because Scott Survey got to go back to North Virginia and make some money. I promise him that. And I want to thank all y'all for coming on. So first, I'm going to introduce the members on the Senate side. Senator Creedy, Senator Jill Vogel, Senator Reed, Senator Ruff, Senator Evans. Online, I believe, Zoom is Senator Bosco and Senator Jennifer McCullough. And then my co-chair, who I'm missing. Oh, excuse me, brother. I got 3 more down there. Oh, my Lord, have mercy. Senator Martin Mason. I apologize. What's the other guy on the end? Senator Bell and Senator Hackwell. I apologize. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Madam Chair, please.
Thank you, Senator Sproul. Welcome to the Joint Committee on Privileges and Elections. Today we're going to hear from our Commissioner Susan Beals on some of the history leading up to the 2022 elections. And we appreciate your presence here today with us. And Senator Sproul, I'm looking forward to working with you in the upcoming legislative session. And I'm going to allow my members to introduce themselves. I'm not going to try to remember everybody's name and the district that you represent, but if you could please go around the room and just introduce yourself and then the district that you are currently representing, we would appreciate that. Thank you.
Israel O'Quinn, I represent the 5th House District and serve as the Vice Chair of P&E.
Les Adams, Pennsylvania County, Henry County, and Martinsville City.
I'm Chris Head, 17th District, which is Roanoke County, Botetourt County, and Little Roanoke City.
Rob Blocks from the 100th District, Eastern Shore, and Peace and Moffett.
Kim Taylor, 63rd District, Dinwiddie, Petersburg, Western Chesterfield, and a handful of Prince George.
Philip Scott, the 88th District, parts of Spotsylvania, Stafford, City of Fredericksburg, and Fauquier.
Kelly Converse Fowler, the 21st District, part of Chesapeake and Virginia Beach.
Jay Leftwich, 78th House District, soon to be 90th, and my district is fully within the city of Chesapeake.
Delegate John McGuire, District 56, House of Delegates. That's Henrico, Goochland, Louisa, and Spotsylvania.
Delegate Karen Green Hall, I represent the 85th District in Virginia Beach.
Delegate Otto Waxman, I represent the 75th District, which is Sussex, Emporia, Greensville, Brunswick, Southampton, Franklin, a little bit of Lunenburg, and let me say Sussex again because it's so great.
Mark Sickles, 43rd District, Fairfax County communities of Huntington, Kingstown, Franconia, and Lorton.
Paul Krizek, I represent the eastern part of Fairfax County, east of Delegate Sickles, near Mount Vernon, and parts of Franconia.
Hi, my name is Dawn Adams. I represent the 68th District, which is Richmond City, Northern Chesterfield, and Henrico County.
Hi, I'm Delegate David Reed. I represent the 32nd District, which is the eastern portion of Loudoun County.
Shelley Simons. I represent part of Newport News in the 94th District.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Michelle Lopes Maldonado, representing the 50th District, which includes the western end of Prince William County with Manassas and Bristow, as well as the city of Manassas.
Delegate Jackie Glass, representing the 89th District, completely Norfolk.
Thank you. We also, Sons Madu just came in. Thank you, sir, for coming in.
Thank you.
You don't have to say where you're from. And y'all notice I didn't ask our
successful in court this morning. Is that okay?
That's fine. You notice I didn't ask where they're from because on the Senate side, we all are statewide, so we don't have to say where we're from. We all are statewide, you see. Now, we're about to start. And let me say one rule, talk with the chairman of P&E on the House side. I got calls pertaining to that some members, doesn't say where, who can be disrespectful, some members who can be rude. I'm not having it. Now, I talked with the chairman of the P&E on the House side, and she'll agree with me if we get out of order, doesn't matter where you're from, who you are, if you're being disrespectful, being out of order, I will adjourn the meeting. Is that clear? I talked to our chairman, and she agreed with me on that. So if anybody, you can ask tough questions. I'm not talking about that. But at the same time, we can be respectful to one another and what have you. So if we are rude and be disrespectful, I will adjourn the meeting. With that, we will start now the presentation from the Commissioner of Election, Commissioner Beals.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to come before you today. I am looking forward to updating you on the work of the Department of Elections. Because this is the first time that I've come before you, I wanted to give you some information about my background. I arrived at the department on March 21st, so I've been there a little over 8 months at this point. Before coming to the department, I was a local election official as a member of the Chesterfield County Electoral Board. As the sole Republican on that board, I worked in a bipartisan fashion with the Democratic members of that board to administer the 2019, 2020, and 2021 elections. I am incredibly grateful to have had that on-the-ground experience as we sought to help explain law changes to voters, to explain how to vote during a pandemic, and we saw the implementation of 45 days of early voting. That experience has served me very well in my role as a commissioner. I wanted to start today by giving you a brief overview of numbers from the 2022 November general election. This year we had 666,000 voters who voted early in person. We had just over 2 million who voted in their election day precincts on election day. Almost 300,000 decided to vote by mail this year, and 13,800 voted provisionally for a total of over 3 million voters. We also had our first statutorily required risk-limiting audit that occurred between the local ascertainment of results and the state certification. The 9th Congressional District was chosen at random to conduct this RLA. Ballots were pulled by local electoral boards and they were hand counted. The result provided election officials strong evidence that they can be 99.99% confident in the reported outcome of the election. This was the Morgan Griffith versus Taisha Lee Devon race. The State Board of Elections certified the November general election last Monday on December 5th, and that began the 10-day recount period, which we are still in. So that's not going to expire until December 15th, and then we will officially be done with the 2022 general election. When I arrived at the department in March, there were a number of projects that required immediate attention. The implementation of legislative changes prior to the 2022 general election, redistricting, and the procurement of a new statewide voter registration system were among the priorities that needed to be addressed. Not only did we have to make changes in the code of Veris to implement some of those legislative changes, but we also had to train 133 registrars on those new processes, and they in turn had to train their officers of election prior to the start of early voting on September 23rd. So for issues like same-day voter registration and absentee by precinct reporting and pre-registration of 16-year-olds, those required changes to Veris, and then they also required training the field. The department also did significant work around risk-limiting audits and ranked choice voting. We had 2 work groups that worked throughout the summer on those 2 issues to put forward recommendations on how to handle those processes. And the amount of time and manpower that was required for our redistricting effort this year cannot be overstated. Our staff and local registrars worked many nights and weekends this summer trying to get their districts in shape for this once-a-decade process. Many Virginians saw their districts change, And the redrawing of the lines happened at the federal, state, and local level, as well as many localities who chose to change their precinct lines as well. All of those had to be updated. We also did our annual voter education effort. We included social media shareables in multiple languages, as well as digital ads and radio ads in English and Spanish for the first time. We also added mobile ads this year. That was something else new that we included, both in English and Spanish, and that was very helpful in increasing our click-through rate to our website. We saw almost 100% increase in the number of people who were going directly to our website for information as a result of those mobile ads. We did hold back a little bit of the voter education funding that we're going to be using this spring, and that is to help with a ranked choice voting education effort. We do have one locality, Arlington, that has chosen to go ahead with their local legislative races to have ranked choice voting for their primary in the spring. And so we are going to use some of that voter education money to make what I would call an election in a box. It's going to be a series of resources that we can give to any locality that is thinking about pursuing ranked choice voting. That'll have shareables, palm cards that you can give to people while they're standing in line to explain the process, because their ballot's going to look markedly different. The top of it's going to look one way, and then the bottom of it's going to look another way. So we are working on that right now to get that in shape for Arlington, and then we have 2 other localities that are considering using ranked choice voting this fall. My top priority for the department is the successful transition to a new statewide voter registration system. The current system that we have went live 15 years ago. It went live in 2007. It actually went live in 2006, but they then had to pull it back and do some more work on it, and then it went live in 2007. From the outset, this is a system that has had issues with its functionality. It was, as you know, the 2018 JLARC study said that it was not functionally reliable. As time has gone on, the issues with it are longstanding. They are well documented, and elect staff and local registrars have done the best they can to conduct elections with this system. We are past time for a new system that brings in new technology and new features and new functionality. Just to give you an idea, in 2007, we did not have iPhones. Most of us were using Blackberries, and Game Boys were also a thing then. So that gives you an idea of the technology that we're talking about that we're using right now. The new system that we're getting is going to handle several different functions that our current system cannot, that we have had to build outside of our current system, including election night reporting, ranked choice voting, and reporting absentee results by precinct. These are all things that we have had to add, but could not add to the current system because it simply can't handle it. So those will be inside the new system. When I arrived, this project was deeply in need of acceleration, and we were faced with multiple competing priorities within the department. The leadership of the department triaged the situation, and we assigned one member of leadership to each of these priorities, including redistricting, implementation of the new system, and the legislative changes that were needed. We negotiated on the 2 vendors that scored the highest. We negotiated with them throughout the summer. We turned over the contract to the AG's office and VITA in September for their high-risk review, and then we awarded the contract in October. We are so anxious to get started on this that we held the kickoff meeting with the vendor for the new system the week after the election. So right now we are in the planning phase, which is a 3-month planning phase, as you can see on that chart up there, that goes till February 2023. And then in February, we will begin the development phase, which is developing, building, testing, and then training the field on how to use it. And the goal is to go live in February of 2025. I was asked here today to come speak about some of the operational challenges that we have faced as a department this year. The first one that I wanted to speak to is the DMV voter registration backlog issue that we had. At the end of September, ELECT identified 107,000 DMV voter registration transactions that had not been processed through to registrars' hoppers. Those transactions included people who went into the DMV or visited online to change their address, to update their registration, or other kinds of changes. Sometimes those are name changes when somebody gets married and they change their name. Between May and September, we saw that there were occasional reports from the field that the DMV registration numbers seemed low, but at no time did it stop transmitting altogether. Each time that the issue was raised, we had roughly 20 tickets. We have a ticket system that registrars use to put in concerns that they have. We receive probably 3,000 to 4,000 tickets a year, roughly 300 a month. We had about 20 tickets from registrars saying, hey, it looks like my hoppers are a little bit low. Every time we saw one of those, our IT team went in. They found that registrations were still flowing to that hopper, so they did not think that there was an issue. Once early voting started in September, that is when we were able to identify the problem, because we had a distinct individual whose record we could trace all the way through the process. And once we were able to do that, we were able to see that there was an issue with other records that had not gone through. The immediate steps that we took to address the issue were to develop a trace, a piece of code that could go all the way through the process to see where the problem was. That trace was developed on September 28th and run through the program. Unfortunately, it started operating correctly on September 26th, so we were not able to replicate the issue per se. We also created a dashboard so that we can track the level of registrations that are coming across and have visibility into that system, and assigned manual monitoring. So someone in the department is assigned to monitor the level of registrations that are coming across on a regular basis. Later in October, we identified an additional 149,000 transactions that did not previously populate to the hoppers that needed to be processed by local registrars. These were records that should have made the initial pull, but they did not make it through the validation process within Veris, which is a different issue than the first issue. We identified those, again, by someone coming to vote who said I had made a change to my record and it did not update. We were able to trace them through the system. In all of these cases, the voter was able to update their information on site and they were able to vote. Understandably, our registrars were very frustrated by this process, and so we looked to see what we had at our disposal in order to help them. I pushed my team to see what could we do at the state level to minimize the impact on registrars. We identified a regulation that could help lessen the impact to them by the state processing voter registration records, which is allowed if a registrar requests it. We sent a survey to the field and asked any registrar who wanted help that they could respond, and we would provide them help. We had 5 localities that responded and said they wanted assistance, and we trained 12 members of our staff who then proceeded to help them process their registrations. Looking ahead to how to prevent this from happening again in the future. Unfortunately, the original Veris system was built without monitoring or logging. It does not have an alert system to tell you when it's not working. That is not part of its functionality. Creating this kind of a monitoring is a project that was actually identified in 2017 when there was a previous DMV registration-related issue. In 2018, that project was approved to move forward, but unfortunately was placed into our project backlog as other priorities rose to the surface. I think in the 2018-2019 timeframe, there was the redistricting effort that had to occur with misplaced voters. And then once we got into 2020, I think we got into the pandemic, and there was a lot of work around that to make voting available to people, and new legislation that came along that pushed that sort of off the priority list. One thing I will say about legislative requirements is, from our perspective, they have a deadline. They have to be in place, ready for the next election. So they are typically what takes the highest priority for us in terms of projects that get done, and ones that we can push to the back burner if we have to do a legislative requirement. That's something that typically happens. We have gone ahead and prioritized this project for the first quarter of 2023. We are already in the planning stages of having a monitoring and logging and alert system created for Veris so that it will track for the next 2 years, and we'll have a way to know when we see failures, performance degradations, things like that. It will alert us and let us know. And this type of monitoring is also one of the 750 requirements of the new statewide voter registration system. The other issue that I was asked to speak about is the mailings that we did after we did the redistricting project. Elect receive funding through the budget to mail all 6 million registered voters a voter notice following redistricting. One part of this you might not be aware of, there's a nationwide paper shortage right now, and so it is very difficult to come across particularly envelopes particularly 6 million of them. So we opted for a postcard. We did a postcard that on one side had the address and a flap that covered the voter's information, and that's how we opted to go with this. Additionally, there's only certain kinds of mailing houses that can handle a mailing of 6 million. There's also only certain kinds of mailing houses that can handle a mailing where you are keeping one portion of the mailing static and you're changing another portion with each individual person. The original mailing that we sent went out in September to 6 million voters. It had a couple issues. The one issue was that we did not account for P.O. boxes and mailed straight to residences. This is an issue for particularly voters in Southwest. Many people who live in rural areas, they have a P.O. box and they can't have anything mailed to a residence. And then we also had an issue with mailings to some of our towns in Northern Virginia, and particularly in Prince William and Fairfax County. Those two localities, along with Manassas and Manassas Park, receive a different mailing from the rest of the state because they're covered under the Voting Rights Act, and they have to be in 4 languages. So that mailing in particular to those two localities, they did not have town ward districts on the original mailing, so we had to remail those. That was a resend of $176,000 to fix those two problems. When we did that resend, 28,000 of the number that were going to Southwest Virginia had an issue. It was sort of the final run that was inside the printer's warehouse where it became misaligned, and so the front and the back of the mailing did not match. It was not the same person's information. We were made aware of that by some of our registrars in Southwest when those started hitting mailboxes and they started hearing about it. The mailing to the towns had a different issue where it kept a portion of the information static. It kept the polling place static in the mailing, and it told all of the voters in those 7 towns that they needed to go to a polling place in the city of Fairfax, which was incorrect. Elect immediately printed new mailers to go to Southwest Virginia and sent them prior to Election Day, and then the registrars of Fairfax and Prince William counties requested to do their own mailings. So they did those, and then we reimbursed them for the cost of that. Going forward, what are some of the solutions so that this doesn't happen again? This is a once-a-decade mailing that we undertake. We know that our registrars know their voters best, and that they have, they know what they need, they know how to mail them. So maybe perhaps in the future we could see about doing this on a reimbursable basis where registrars could go ahead and do the work and then they could get reimbursed by the state if they want to allocate funds for us to do it. We also are working to secure a relationship with a printer with a capacity for these projects, and then also evaluate our processes internally for how we do these types of mailings. Overall, we are looking to try to improve the operation and performance of our list maintenance practices and other operations as we get ready to go into this new system. One of the things that we're looking at is all of our list maintenance practices. We receive information from several different types of state agencies, and all of them are received, almost all of them, in different ways. Some of them come electronically, some of them come on paper, some come once a month, some come once a week. Some DMV is the only one that has a real-time live interface with us that we receive information as it comes immediately from them. So we are taking a hard look at all of these processes to see how they can be improved before we go into the new system. In addition to that, we are trying to do some extra work around our data that we have before we do our data migration to the new system. We're going, right now we receive information from VDH weekly on deaths, but we are going to go back and ask for all of the death data that VDH has going back to 1960, so 62 years of data, and we're going to run that against our voter registration list just to make sure that no one has been missed. The other thing that we're going to do is, one of the recommendations of the 2018 JLARC study is that we have a USPS national change of address mailing twice a year. Typically, we've done this once a year. This is where we mail to all of the people who filled out a card that says they wanted to, forward their mail somewhere or change their address, we go back to them and say, hey, it looks like maybe you've moved. Would you like to go ahead and cancel your registration or update your registration? We have such a transitional population that doing this twice a year is going to help us keep up and keep our records more accurate. So we're going to do that this year or next year in 2023 for the first time, and that mailing is going to go out in February and July.
Mr. Chairman?
Try to finish first, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to continue our close relationship with VRAV and VIVA. VRAV is the Registrars Association and VIVA is the Electoral Boards Association. We continue to have biweekly meetings with them and talk about whatever issues that they see. At our December meeting last week, we had a hot wash of the 2022 election where they had an opportunity to bring forward those issues that they experienced, and we could share those together and try to find some solutions. Additionally, I feel like it is incredibly important for the commissioner to get out of Richmond and go and visit registrars in their offices. I have visited already 35 registrars' offices so far this year. Most of them I visited during early voting so that I could see their early voting operations, see what impact that has on them. It's an opportunity to hear from them what the challenges are that they face. Many of them have told me this is the first time they've ever had a commissioner in their office. And it really brought to light for me, just the few places that I have visited, how many of our registrars are one-man shops. They are one-man shops. They might have a part-time deputy that works with them, but it is a lot for one person to handle all of the different requirements that are required of that job. We've also taken a grassroots approach to training. That was also one of the items in the 2018 JLARC study that was recommended, that we differentiate our training, offer both in-person and online. We decided to take it to our registrars this year and had 4 satellite trainings around the state this summer. We had a training in Fredericksburg, Stanton, Newport News, and Blacksburg this summer. That gave our registrars an opportunity to meet collectively with the people that are local to them, or there are some people who decided to travel to a different area to attend training. Additionally, we provided some online training opportunities for specific topics that registrars asked about. They asked us for help with how to manage FOIA requests, so we did an online training for them, just going over the law and what the requirements are and how to respond to a FOIA request. We also did a training on the post-election canvass. Additionally, I directed elect staff to go out into the field and attend the post-election canvass after Election Day this year. Members of our policy team and our training team went to, I think, 5 or 6 different localities. They spanned out and each went to a different one to see the canvass process firsthand, because it's great to talk about it theoretically, but when you actually see it happening and see our registrars and our electoral board members run it, I think it helps a lot to inform your work at the state. Finally, we're going to be bringing our registrars' voices into our post-election report this year. As you know, we do a post-election report every year where we talk about the election, what went well, what didn't went well, and we have a survey in the field right now to registrars to provide their perspective in that report, which should be ready in January. Moving forward, to recap, my priority is to have a smooth transition to the new statewide voter registration system. We're going to accomplish this in 2 ways: to focus on list maintenance practices to prepare for our data migration to the new system, and then to implement more robust monitoring into the existing system. We are currently working on both of these goals. Our list maintenance team has recruited some new employees to that team. We are actively working with agencies to review our processes and update our MOUs with them. And we're also, as I said, initiating this notifications process to alert us when we see performance issues in the current system. We are also going to take a look at other projects that may have been backlogged over time and see if we need to try to surface those to address those before we move into the new system. So thank you for your attention. I know that was a lot, and I would be happy to take your questions.
Before we get started, so I've talked with the chairman, Margaret, we decided on how we're going to do this. And I was explaining to her that I was in the House for 23 years, and I favored the House because of Jay Leverton and Miles Sickles. So I favored the House. But Jill Bogle reminded me that I'm in the Senate now. So because of this, what we're going to do is that the chairman is going to take care of the House question. I'll take care of the Senate question on either side. That way, Mark, I love you, but I'm in the Senate now, okay? Okay. Anyway, so we're going to start off with But Delegate Evans, please.
Senator, I've been promoted too.
I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Commissioner. Appreciate the attention to detail in your explanation, but I was wondering, particularly in the redistricting mailings, I know you focused on 7 towns and PO boxes, but I know in Arlington and Precinct 107, all the voters were sent erroneous information about the polling place as well. Did that happen in other parts of the state aside from the towns or PO boxes?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay, this was the Cherrydale precinct where they were told that sent to an old precinct and they were sent a corrected mailing. Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up, I wanted to ask why and how did these errors occur?
Excuse me, sir. I know I'm a delegate, but you got to.
I said, Mr. Chairman, may I follow
Yes,
up?
sir.
I didn't.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm curious why and how, particularly the redistricting mailing, what the origin, did you identify why these occurred? Was it a proofreading mistake or a programming mistake, or how could all the P.O. Box people be told to go to one particular precinct?
The town people, you mean?
Town people.
Right. So when we saw a proof, we don't see a proof for every single voter notice, right? We see a proof for this is what the voter notice will look like. And so that was a human error missing the proof, yes.
And was that on the vendor side or within the department?
I was within the department.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Delegate O'Quinn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question related to the, I guess it's more into the list maintenance heading that you discussed. I know we saw in the news recently the issue with the fairly large number of reoffending felons who were on that list. Could you give us a little bit of insight, sort of how you came about that information and where the disconnect is and what we're going to need to do going forward?
So as I said, we undertook a lot of efforts to look at our list maintenance, and we identified that when the original code was written in 2011 for the restoration of rights process, what it did was, if you are a felon, you are placed on what's called our prohibited list. You are given a start date and you have no end date. So the restoration of rights process would expire you from the felon's prohibited list. Unfortunately, the way the code was written, you could not then unexpire somebody if they came back in and reoffended. So once you were restored, as for purposes of VERIS, you were always going to be restored. And so even though these names were run against that list to say, hey, these are new felons, these people have reoffended, it did not pick them up. So we were able to go back and find all the people for which this occurred. There was about 10,558 of them. We recognized that. We put those into the hoppers this weekend. I can tell you as of 11 o'clock this morning, 4,500 of them have already been processed by registrars, so they're almost halfway done with those voters. Moving forward, we have rewritten the code so that this does not occur anymore, but we will also make sure that it's correct in the new system.
Mr. Chair. Scott, next. Okay. You finished? Scott Daniels, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Ms. Beals. I had a couple questions. So first of all, I think the total number of the voter registration application or voter registration changes that didn't get processed was, what, 300 to 340,000, something like that total? Is that right?
Is that a question?
Yeah, it was around that.
It's not actually that, because the number that we had to put out when we put out the 149,000 had not been deduplicated yet because of a process in VERIS. So I would say it was probably significantly lower than that, closer to around 200,000.
Further question, Mr. Chairman? Yes. Okay, so out of the 140,000, that was over, what, a 6-month period of time?
It was from May to September.
Further question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So, okay, so it's 140,000 over 4 months. That's about 35,000 a month, something like that. So I'm trying to understand how it is that somebody didn't notice 35,000, 1,200, 1,100 a day drop in volume moving through some type of system. I mean,
right.
Do you all not get weekly reports or monthly reports, or do you all not get daily reports about volume? Because I would think like a number that large being missed from the system would be noticeable to somebody on some report or at some process at some point before it got to be that large. And I'm just curious as to sort of what the kind of reporting you all get on a daily, weekly, monthly basis or whatever that would not have flagged that at some point before it became apparent after whatever, I think you said there were 20 complaints about it before you all were finally able to
Right.
track down what happened.
So just to give you a sense of how that process works, we receive every single transaction that takes place at the DMV. So whether or not you wanted to go ahead and do a voter registration transaction, whether or not you stopped halfway through, and whether or not you said, no, I'm not a U.S. citizen, I don't want to register to vote, we receive all of those. So then we receive massive amounts of data, probably 200,000 a month. That we receive from DMV, and then the number of those, once they go through our validation process, that actually make it to registrar's hoppers is about 30%. Those are ones that we can validate as, yes, this person intends to register, yes, this is not a duplicate of them, from a different time, they're actually updating something, we have a signature that we can attach to it. If it has all the pieces in it, it's about 30% that goes to our hoppers. So yes, there was a decrease in the number that we saw over the summer. Yes, it was missed. I don't think that it was intentional in any way. We receive a monthly report on what the numbers are. We post it out to our website. Anybody can go and see what those statistics are. I will say that we were extraordinarily busy with redistricting and procuring a new system and legislative changes. We also had a number of people in our list maintenance division that left us, and so we were looking to replace positions. So all of those sort of conspired to create this situation.
Mr. Chairman, I have a further question.
One last question, I'm gonna move on to somebody else.
One last question. That's it? Okay, well, I'm going to ask two questions in my one question.
One last question, I'm gonna move on to somebody else. One last
Okay.
question. I'll come back to you.
All right. My dad bought me a computer when I was like 10 because he said computers are real neat because they do exactly what you tell them to do. They don't think for themselves, right? So when you code something, and if it messes up, then you have to go back and debug it. And then he also told me once, there's really good car repairmen, and there's really bad ones. The good ones will figure out what's wrong with the car, and they'll tell you. The bad ones just keep replacing parts until the car starts working again, right? And so what I'm trying to understand is what was the cause that caused the computer code to stop talking to each other or to stop validating or whatever? I mean, it's something must have changed. I don't know. Was there a change in how the data was being forwarded over? Was there a change in the code somehow got changed for some reason? I mean, what was the cause that caused all this malfunction to happen when it came to the voter registration applications?
Right. As I said, we did develop a trace to go back through the system to try to make the error repeat itself, and we were not able to get it to repeat itself. It started functioning normally.
Okay, so we don't know the cause.
All good.
All right.
It's my. Call her name so they can get it. So they can hear you. Call her name.
Delegate Maldonado, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question here for the Commissioner. Thanks very much for this exhaustive explanation. These things are complex, and I don't think there are all the answers yet, but we also have some special elections coming up in the next couple of weeks. And so while we are working on these other issues, one of the concerns I have is what are we doing for the folks who have to vote in these special elections when we've already issued the new polling places, that they have to go back and vote in the current polling places? What is the education that we're doing to make sure that we're mitigating any confusion that sort of compounds the previous confusion that people were experiencing? Thank you.
So in both of the cases of the special election that is on January 10th, those folks had information prior to. Their information is correct in terms of the people who are having to vote in districts that existed before, which is some of what we're having there. We have provided information on our website where you can look up your polling precinct and see, is this an election that affects you? Is this an election that you should be voting in? We provided that information on social media and put that out to folks so that they could understand that, yes, you're voting on a district that has old lines, even though you may have received information to tell you that there's new lines for you coming in 2023.
Thank you. Senator Dees?
Thank you. And I appreciate the presentation. Of the 10,555 people that you've identified that were felons that were on the rolls, I'd like to know how many of them actually voted, if you know that, and what steps you've taken in where the two special elections are going to occur between now and on January 10th, and to make sure you were talking about some kind of computer code, not a change in the code of Virginia that caused these to be missed.
So for the number of people who have voter credit is 1,248. That is since 2011 to current, so that's over the last 11 years. In terms of what we're doing for the two special elections, they, as I said already, the hoppers were just filled with these felons a couple hours ago, and already our registrars have gotten through half of them. So I believe that they will be finished by the end of this week, having them canceled and off the rolls.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could, so you 10,500 and some number was a cumulative number since 2011. It wasn't something that just happened in the last year.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Before we go to the House side, I want to make sure on this side, to my Republican friends, you can ask questions too. I want to make sure that. Yes, sir. I want to make sure that. I love y'all too. You got it. Thank you, ma'am.
Just so you know, on this side, there is no queue up here. So if you want to ask a question, just kind of like raise your hand or something. But right now I have Delegate Krzik and then Delegate Simons when we come back. So Delegate Krzik.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate this report. Next year is going to be a very tough year because you have a lot of local races. You've got clerks, sheriffs, supervisors, school board, soil and water conservation board. There's a lot going on. Have they all been, how is that, the redistricting, have they all been assigned to their correct districts? And the second part of my question is, what can we do here in the General Assembly to help you prepare for that?
So we have a couple of localities that postdated their ordinances till after the 2022 election for a variety of reasons. For example, Loudoun County did because they had two school board elections they needed to run on old lines in November 2022. So I believe there's a total of maybe, I think it's 11 localities that have not yet completed redistricting. They've completed their congressional, but not all of the precinct changes they might make. They are in the process of doing that now. I think 5 of them are being completed this week. One of the things that you all could do is check on your localities, see if they're through redistricting, give them a nudge if they're not. Some of our friends are not in a big rush to do this, and that would be extraordinarily helpful, particularly in some of the rural areas.
Senator Ruff?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. How long does the national change of address match take to run?
It's a file that we download and we mail it out to the people who are on that list, and then they can respond or not. If they do respond to their local registrar, then they will make the changes that they ask them to make, whether that's canceling them or updating their address. If they do not respond, then they're placed on what's called the inactive list, and then after 2 federal elections, they are then removed from the rolls. That's a federal law.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Your predecessor did not do the match, and the argument, his reasoning was that the office did not have time to do it. Have you done the national match?
Can you rephrase that a little bit? When you say national match, we're part of
change of address. Yes.
Right. So we're part of several efforts to do that. We are part of ERIC, which is an organization where we work with DMVs from across 30 other states, where we compare information as well and whether or not people move. So there's a lot of different efforts that are underway to make sure that we're matching and removing people from the rolls if they are no longer living in Virginia.
Thank you.
So
Yes,
I
sir.
don't know if I heard
Yes,
the
sir.
answer. Have you done the official national change of address match?
So we conducted a national change of address mailing last July, and we will be conducting 2 more this year in 2023.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Simons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that detailed presentation. I really appreciate it. And I'm interested that the new statewide voter registration system will be in Spanish and other languages. I think that's wonderful. I remember during the last election hearing that there weren't resources for voters in Spanish online, and I wondered if that was a locality issue that we need to be talking to our local registrars about making sure they have information in Spanish, or if you had any insights to how we can improve Spanish language access.
So we have actually put together a cross-divisional team inside the Department of Elections to address the issue of minority languages and translations, particularly on our website. We have a process in place to ensure that every new document that is posted, whether it's a candidate bulletin or information about upcoming elections, is translated into 3 languages: Spanish, Korean, and Vietnamese. And then we also are meeting weekly to continually go back through the website to older pieces of it. There's a lot of information on there, and make sure that those documents are translated as well. We are always open to your feedback. If you find something that you see a voter is having trouble with, please let us know, and we'd be happy to address it.
Thank you. Senator Bosco. She's online, I believe.
That's right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Commissioner, I really appreciate your working with me when the town had the problem with our voters, and appreciated your fast feedback with my office. As we're looking towards the future, given all the challenges that we've had this year, what you've talked about with our registrars having big challenges, what additional resources are really needed to ensure that these problems are not going to arise in the future? And then I have a follow-up as well.
So I think that mailing issues are something, unfortunately, that occur. I know in Fairfax County on October 27th, they had a mailing where they went and just a regular mailing to newly registered voters of 5,600 people. They used a printer that they've used for a very long time, and that mailing became misaligned. And so 1,200 of those voters received incorrect notices. So this is not unique to us. I think it's maybe the cost of doing business. You can work with a printer for a very long time, and they can have a bad day. I do believe that a lot of that printing is best done at the local level. Like I said, they know their voters, and they know how they need to be communicated with, and sort of what the nuances are of their particular area.
But Mr. Chair, just follow up here.
Yes, ma'am.
What resources specifically do you feel like we need to give to our registrars? I've been at a national conference, and we really delved down into election policy, where we discussed that our electoral boards are crucial infrastructure, and it was very much stressed that we need to make sure that we are providing the resources necessary for our registrars to do the work that they need to do effectively. And so my question for you is, what resources do you all need to help make this as efficient and effective and accurate as possible?
So I would suggest that you speak to the registrar community. I don't want to speak for them on what they say that their needs are. I mean, at the department, I feel like that we have sufficient resources. I know on the local level that is not always the case. So I think that if you spoke with Brenda Cabrera of the Registrars Association, they could give you a real clear picture of what their needs are.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Delegate Adams, Les.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for being here and for your presentation, and particularly appreciate the information with regard to the VERA system, which seems to be source of a lot of problems over a lot of years. Can you speak a little bit about how you see the replacement of that system leading to specific improvements? And also, you mentioned that that with some of the new legislative implementations that were made, that sort of contributed to part of the challenge that you inherited. In your dealing with local registrars and implementing these new policies, is there any particular issues that are cropping up specific to these new policies?
So the RFP for the new Vera system has 750 requirements. It requires all kinds of new functionality that the current system does not have. There's also service level agreements which require the vendor to provide us with a fiscal impact if they're within 24 hours during session, if a change is proposed in legislation to the system, so that we can come back to you quickly and give you the information that you need to know what is something like this going to cost. There's like I said, there was a lot of functionality that was lacking at the beginning when we received the Vera system to begin with, and we've sort of layered on top of it, right, over the years and keep adding things to it. We took stock of that before we issued the RFP. We went out to the localities in 2019. I think they did 12 site visits. They did surveys of registrars to collect all of the information they could of what they needed to include in this new system, and that was part of the RFP that they included in terms of requirements for the new system. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question? Oh, new legislation?
Yeah, new legislation, and what sort of issues are you hearing from local folks as they're trying to implement these new policies?
Right, Mr. Chairman.
Specifically with some of the ones that you referenced in your slide.
Right, Mr. Chairman. I would say that I don't know that we're in need of new legislation right now. That is something that, for us, whenever new legislation passes, it is always a priority and something that we have to address immediately. I think that if we're able to have some greater legislative engagement with the department and stakeholders before a bill comes to us, that might be helpful, whether that's in the form of a commission or some other type of entity where we could look at bills and look at their impact. That might prove useful, particularly as we're in this 2-year period where we're trying to keep a system going and build a new system. That might be useful.
Okay, so Senator Jen McCullough, I believe she's online. Are you there, Jen? Good. Senator Jennifer McCullough, are you online? She's not? Okay. Then I'll take the next one online with the help of Senator Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation. One of those bills that we burdened you with was tracking back the early voting to the precincts, which is really important. Could you tell us what guidance you gave the registrars for the timeline to have that done?
So we conducted extensive training for our registrars over the summer on how to conduct the absentee by precinct. They had to fill in a lot of cells on spreadsheets. As I said, we had to do that outside of Veris. What we asked of them is that they get it in as quickly as they could. For some of them, that was easy, and they could do it election night, and it was no problem. For others of them, it was a much more arduous task. And it's funny, it doesn't always track with the size of the locality. Sometimes for a smaller locality with very few precincts, they can do it very quickly. And some of the larger localities, they have software upgrades where they can also do it very quickly. Oftentimes, it's those people kind of in the middle that get pinched, where they're a larger locality, but they don't have a ton of staff. And they're the ones that sometimes end up taking a little bit longer.
Mr. Chairman, so you didn't, there was no guidance that it had to be done that day?
There was not.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Glass, and then on my side, I have Delegate O'Quinn, Delegate Sickles, Delegate Maldonado, and Delegate Reed, just so everybody's coming to life over.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a series of these are true statements, right? We've got a permanent absentee voter list, right? And that means on the first day or the first days of early absentee voting, there were a significant number of ballots that were mailed out to a large amount of voters with this thing that we had. So on that first day when those ballots went out, there was already a backlog. You all already had a backlog of registrations. Am I correct in saying that?
That's correct.
Okay. And so with that, were there any efforts to sort of prioritize the updates of those voters who were already on the permanent absentee list? Okay.
Not only that, but there were also registrars who reached out specifically to those voters to ensure that they received their absentee ballot in time.
Okay. Right. Okay. I think that answers my next question. So is it true that some of those voters had absentee ballots that went to incorrect addresses?
If you were on the voter registration list with a previous address, it probably would have gone to your previous address.
Okay, sorry. Can I ask one question?
Yes, ma'am. Go to your chair.
What matters are you all? Madam Chair said it was okay.
Be sure to go through your chair.
I apologize. Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so what measures are you guys taking at this point to ensure that all the voter registrations are properly updated prior to ballots being mailed out, knowing that we are trying to keep a system going until 2025?
That's right. Like I said, the national change of address mailing that we're going to do 2 times this year, next year, that's definitely going to help with that process to get that information updated as quickly as we can. I think that we have also, as far as the DMV registration issue is concerned, we have created a dashboard at the department where we can see on a regular basis what number of registrations are coming across, and we also have assigned an individual to track registrations on a monthly basis.
Last question, is that okay? I'm sorry. Is there a way that we can be sure that none of those absentee ballots that went to inaccurate addresses were counted as proper votes?
So if somebody is on the permanent absentee list and they receive a ballot in the mail and they mail it back to us, there's certain things that are required for them to provide on the envelope for them to say that they are who they are. They need to provide their social security number. They need to provide their address. So there are checks in the process to ensure that if you're filling out a ballot, if you accidentally receive it in the mail, that it's actually coming from the voter that it was intended for.
Thank you. We are trying to get the members who have not spoken first before I go back around. Delegate Senator Bell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Quick question. One of the pieces of legislation that was passed last year was the bill I did on risk limiting audits. And if you could, you mentioned that, if you could give us an update where we're at on that, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
So as you know, the risk limiting audit bill was passed. The state board has approved the ballot polling method for the way that's the process they choose to use to conduct these RLAs. There are several different methods that you can use for risk limiting audits. That bill allowed for the RLAs to be conducted prior to certification. It also asked that the State Board of Elections develop a manual, which we have done. We had a work group that met several times over the summer to do that manual. It also moved the certification date to the first day in December, and it allowed for localities to request for certain local races to receive a risk limiting audit if they want it. One of the things that we have received a request from the field for is to look at other methods of risk limiting audits and consider perhaps the batch comparison method as something that we would offer to folks. So that's something that we're going to be taking a look at over the next couple months.
I look forward to working with you on that. My take on it is the bill I did would actually allow the batch comparison.
Okay.
But if you needed further clarification, because I think that's a good method and it's a tool that's out there. But if we need to clarify that, happy to help you with that.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Bell, I'd be interested to meet and talk more about that.
Thank you.
Delegate Sickles.
Hi, good morning. And I think I've gotten appreciation over the last 19 years on how difficult your job is. It's really amazing what you have to do, and with the 133 jurisdictions that have various capabilities. I wondered if you would comment on a couple things. One, we passed a bill that allowed the state to help with GPS for counties that did not have a GPS mapping system, which was a lot of small town and rural Virginia didn't have it. And I wondered if you had any requests for that service yet. I wanted to ask you about if you could characterize the contract with the new vendor on Veris and explain to us about how it's an ongoing contract. It's about 1/3 of the cost of it maybe in that neighborhood is for ongoing services
For
to
maintenance.
maintain it over the years, and what's that include? And does the contract have enough flexibility in it to adapt to any new laws we may pass? Will there be any difficulty with them as, how are you protecting us against changes that might occur with that part of the contract? And I did want to note that we gave the registrars a raise to be up to the treasurer's salary a year ago, and that, I think that was made 133 people happy across the Commonwealth. And if you're getting death threats, you need to get a salary that's commensurate with that, I think, and they put up with a lot out there. Anyway, those three subject matters, if you could comment on them. Thank you.
My delegate, you sound like a lawyer, so I'm assuming you got all those questions that he was asking. Do you have that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Delegate Sickles, can you just, the first one
Well,
again?
Well, the last one was just a comment. The first one was about, has anyone used
Oh,
our
the GIS.
GPS, or
Right.
GIS system?
Right.
Yeah,
So we are updating that we are consistently updating that in our system. I will tell you that for purposes of redistricting, which is, when a lot of folks are using GIS, we've still seen a lot of our localities that are in rural areas, they typically don't have somebody on their staff that does that, and so they're contracting with a local planning agency to do that work for them. But we are updating the GIS into our new system. Veris did not come with GIS capability, as you're well aware, and so we're going to make sure that that is part of the new system. In terms of your questions about how we're going to protect us from the contract, I have our Director of Operations, DJ Geiger, here with me today. She's the one who negotiated the contract, so I would be happy to have her address that for you.
Oh, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm DJ Geiger. I believe the first question was the ongoing costs, what's included in that, the maintenance and operations. That would include any security patches, any updates, any enhancements that the vendor does for its other clients. So basically anything that goes wrong, they fix it if it's their code, if it's their product. What we would pay for is anything that's required, a change for a new coding or any programming that is driven by legislation. And the way we would do that is that under our service level agreements, they're required during a session, if we give them hey, here's a bill, can you tell us what this does to your system and any changes that you would have to make and how much it's going to cost us? They have to respond within 24 hours so that we can provide that fiscal impact to you all and you'll have that information. Second one, flexible new laws, I think that's the SLA, where if you do have a change in the code, they will get us an estimate of what that's going to cost and how long it's going to take, and then we can proceed from there with a contract modification.
Madam Chair, just to follow up, could you just give us like a big picture summary of how this is going to change our world? This new system. I mean, this has been, as it was noted earlier, a problem for decades now. Mm-hmm. And it was during a certain 2-year period that we actually bit the bullet and put the money into this and finally moved forward with this. Can you tell us what we're going to get now, and just so we can tell our constituents why this improvement is worth this $30 million?
Yeah, so I think Commissioner Beals kind of mentioned that you build a house and then you want an extra room, and maybe your house was brick, but now your room's aluminum siding or vinyl, and then you decide you're going to build out another room, or you're going to bust out the second floor or something like that. So it's a sort of a mishmash. That's kind of how I think of Veris, where we had to run so many different transactions that it kind of stopped the system, it slowed it down. So we had to offboard some data. We wanted election night results, so we had to build out a little module for that because it wasn't included. This basically is, we took everything we learned from Veris, every problem that we had, and basically tried to build it into this new system. So when they did Veris, I went back and I dug up some old paperwork, and there were about 200 requirements in there. And the new system is 750. So there's quite a few things that happened in between there that we decided, hey, by the way, we need this. One of the things that we have right now, if you want to change a letter that is going out to a voter, it's in the code of the system. It's programmed in. So if you want to change one sentence, you've got to go into the code and actually program it in there. This new system, for example, you just add a different correspondence to it. It's an actual attachment. So it's a lot more user-friendly. The way the vendor has described it to us, data in, data out. If there's a way that you put it in there, there's a way that you can extract it. So it will allow us a lot more data. You'll have your statistics in there from election night reporting. It's just a much more robust system. It's something that if we learn something, we kept note of it. There's a staff person who anytime something happens, she writes down on a list and then it gets added to those requirements. So they've been tracking it for a while. And during the implementation, anything new that comes up, we're going to take a look at with the vendor and say, does this change anything in what you were building for us? And if so, do we need to modify that contract so that when we go live, it's as up to date as we can possibly have it?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Madugo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, one of the things I understood from listening to things was a lot of the problems originally occurred when VITA made some updates to the system. So has there been any efforts made on VITA's part to make sure that updates are going to be compatible with the system as it goes forward over the next 2 years?
Yes, I have had several meetings with Bob Osmond, the CIO of VITA, and we are working very well together. One of the things that VITA did for the first time around the election this year was institute a change freeze system Commonwealth-wide. No one was allowed to change anything for the 2 days around the election to make sure that everything worked the way it was supposed to. We did actually have a longer change freeze, too, for just anyone doing anything to our services prior to the election. So they are absolutely on board. They understand that what they do oftentimes has impacts on us, and that's an ongoing conversation.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
In a different direction, this morning, I'm assuming others got them as well, received a number of emails talking about individuals looking at home sales and voter registrations in certain communities. What happens if somebody comes to y'all and says, Frank Ruff's home has been sold? Is Frank Ruff still registered at that address when somebody new is registered at that address? What do y'all do with that information?
So voter registration is handled at the local level. So anyone is allowed to go into a registrar's office and ask to see a list of the registered voters for that locality. That's a public document, something that has to be available at all times. There is no way for us to cancel someone at the state level. That has to be done at the local level, which is why you see all of these processes have to flow down to hoppers, down to the localities where they manage voter registration. When somebody moves, we do not have somebody standing on 95 to stop your moving truck and say, hey, did you cancel your voter registration before you left the state? And so that is why we use all of these different processes that we can to try to keep it as updated as possible, keep our voter rolls updated, including comparing lists annually with other DMVs from other states, doing the change of address mailings. Those are all ways in which we seek to try to update the voter rolls.
Mr. Chairman, maybe I should ask my question differently. So what happens when somebody reports to y'all that voter registrar, pick a jurisdiction, has received this information? Is there the ability to change it in the system? Can y'all check whether they've made that change or not? Or is it exclusively with the local registrar?
So it is exclusively with the registrar. The only person that can cancel your voter registration is you, except if you are placed on the inactive list because of a result of a confirmation mailing that you did not respond to, and then federal law says after 2 federal elections, we can then remove you from the rolls.
Delegate Maldonado.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question actually has already been asked and answered.
Delegate Aquin.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So I would like to say that of the registrars that I talk to, and admittedly they're mainly in Southwest Virginia, I think they do appreciate the fact that, and we appreciate the fact that you are actively communicating with them and getting out to see them. I think that makes a difference and gives them a level of comfort to pick up the phone and call Richmond if they have an issue. So we do appreciate that. I've gotten feedback on this particular issue Was curious what your feedback has been, either from the registrars or here at the state level, as it relates to same-day voter registration.
Do you have a specific question or just generally speaking?
Generally speaking.
This is the first year that we did same-day registration, and I think anytime you do something for the first time, you're going to have a lot of lessons learned. We are actively seeking feedback from registrars about what their experience was. We opted to go with doing same-day registration as a provisional process because it was something that, if this was going to be conducted in precincts on election day by officers of election, who are people that typically work 2 days a year, it needed to be a process that they were familiar with. And so that's why we opted to go with a provisional process. I think that we expected that we were going to see higher numbers from those localities that had colleges and universities on their campus, and that came true. We did see that in a number of localities with thousands of provisional ballots that they then had to process. I think there were impacts to registrars with the timing of it. I think, trying to do I think some people had 20-hour-long provisional ballot meetings to try to process all of the provisional ballots. To do that on top of putting in the absentee by precinct results, on top of all of the other things, the canvass that has to occur. There's a lot of things we're fitting now into that week between Election Day and when we ask for locals to provide the ascertainment of their results. So I know that there were some feedback that I received from registrars that was a difficult time for them.
Okay, thank you. Before I go back to Adams, Sontag-Griff, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to follow up on Delegate O'Quinn's question about the same-day voter registrations. In your first slide, you said there were 3 million total ballots cast, and 13,834 of them were provisional ballots. I was wondering how many of the provisional ballots actually counted, were not disqualified and counted towards the total?
So I believe the number that we had, that the estimate of provisionals immediately following Election Day was 38,000.
So there were 13 of the 38,000, only 13,000 of the 38,000 were counted?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if I might, do we know how many of them were new voter registration applicants? In other words, not just moving their address, but new same day?
I don't have that information, I'm sorry.
Is that something that Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Is that something that we can determine?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ubben, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have, we'll be done at 2:30, please.
So maybe time for a
Yes.
couple more
Yes,
questions?
ma'am.
Okay. All right, so over on my side, I have Delegate Reed and then Delegate Waxman, and then that might shore it up for us. Okay, Delegate Reed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Beals, thanks very much for providing this information. I do have a couple questions that are all kind of related because we've talked about the Veris replacement, the RFP, the requirements. Have you actually awarded the follow-on work, and can you tell us who? And also, can you share with us what their experience is with building out and maintaining a statewide election system?
Sure. So the contract has been awarded to the Canton Group, which is 3 different companies that are working together. They have worked in the state of Maryland for a number of years and done multiple projects for them. They also are currently working on the Los Angeles County system, which is also a system that has 6 million voters, similar to Virginia, and they are making a new system for them as well.
Okay. Another question? Something? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just wanted
Is it my time?
to sort of finish up on where I was. So I think what you said was we don't know what the cause was of what caused the 2 glitch. Well, you said one glitch was a failure to validate, and then there's a different glitch, but you weren't able to replicate it or figure out what caused the system to freeze or hang up or
That's
whatever.
correct.
Yeah. So my question is there going to be an further effort to figure out what the cause was, or is the way you all are going to try to avoid the the way you're going to try to avoid this being a problem again in the future is to put in place I guess, monitoring systems to look and see when there's sort of data anomalies that will cause you to go back and say something's happening again until you get your new system? Which would, two
Mr.
questions in
Chairman,
there.
Senator Surville, unfortunately, right now, the situation that we have is we don't typically hear about situations until they hit our registrars. They are the first notice that we get that something is wrong in our system because they are seeing it on their end. And that is because we don't have that monitoring or those alerts in place. So we need to have real-time information that something is going wrong as soon as it's going wrong. So yes, the monitoring is going to be a critical element that's going to help us get through the next 2 years.
Further question, Mr. Chairman? Yes, sir. So I guess there's going to be no further efforts to try to ascertain the cause, I guess. In addition to that, so the second question I had was, you said, I think, that the second batch that you all announced, the 140,000, which overlap a little bit with the first batch, resulted from a failure to validate, I think is what you said, when you put the data through your system. And this, I think, relates to some other things I've heard over the last 14 years, for example, that sometimes when you put in your address change or your voter registration at DMV and it gets rejected, the voter doesn't get notified, and we've talked about maybe giving the voter notice or whatever. So my question is, like, when your system doesn't validate a record, does somebody get notice that the record didn't validate? Does the voter get noticed? Does the DMV get noticed? Does one of your employees get noticed? I'm just trying to understand how that works. And I understand you said, I think 70% don't validate or something like that. So I'm just trying to understand that process. Can you explain that some?
I think to back up to start, if anyone has been to the DMV lately, you know that whether you apply for a license tag or do anything, they're going to ask you all your voter registration questions, whether or not you have any intent to update that information. And so we see a lot of people who kind of get through that process and say, no, I don't want to do this. And a lot of what we see coming across is duplicates or uncompleted applications. So just to give you a picture of how that process works, the DMV sends the information to us through an external API, which is an application program interface. It's the way that two computers talk to each other. The external API then goes to an internal API. That then goes to the elects overnight process within Veris. So both when it's in the internal API, which is a staging database, there's validation that's done at that point. There's also validation that's done on the overnight process. Some of the kinds of validation that's done with the internal API is they make sure that it's complete and then does this person intend to register. When it gets to the overnight process, it's did we attach a signature and can we confirm the locality for the person, that they're in the right place. So what we saw with that second batch was because we were having to push these registrations through outside the normal course of business, it was being done manually, that elect overnight process failed. And it treated those particular records as though they were duplicates when they were not. And so we had to then go back and pull them. We always have all of the data, right? We have all of it available to us so that we can go back. There's a lot of times that someone will say, well, I went to register the DMV and it didn't go through, and we can go back and literally find your record and say, no, see, you said here that you didn't want to continue with your process. So we were able to go back and find those individually, and that was the part that failed in that second process.
Mr. Chairman, last question on that. So again, I'm just not clear. When something doesn't validate, does somebody get a notice?
I'm sorry. I didn't address that part.
Yeah.
So when the information gets from the DMV to elect, there is a message that's sent from elect that says, we received it. We have received it. But I don't think that when it is, I would say whenever a record goes to a hopper, also even if it's a duplicate or an update of any kind, the voter is notified. But in terms of that validation, no, they do not get notified.
Okay.
Thank you.
Delegate Reed. Oh, sorry, I didn't crush you off. Delegate Converse Fowler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just considering what we don't know what we don't know. And it seems like we have all these little inefficiencies and we could run into bigger problems and things that we don't know what we don't know. So my question is, do we have a summary or something that we can work off legislatively that would be helpful to us to know, here's all the issues that we could be solved? Are there any recommendations from the department in terms of ways to make the system more efficient?
So we don't have specific legislative recommendations for how to make the system more efficient. A lot of those inefficiencies have been encapsulated in the 750 requirements for the new system. We've been tracking those over time and documented them very well. So we're intending to fix them with the new system.
Delegate Waxman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wanted to thank you, Commissioner Beals, for your time here today. This issue is probably one of the most asked topics that constituents ask of me on a weekly basis. I did have a question just for clarification about the DMV registration. If someone goes to DMV and changes their registration address on their vehicle, does that automatically change their voter registration? Do they have to ask that the voter registration be changed, or do they have to ask that it not be changed?
So most people, when they go to a transaction at the DMV, if you've been recently, I went recently because I had to get my 16-year-old son a license. There's a little, looks like a credit card swiping machine, and it asks you a series of questions. So you can opt out at that point, but every voter is automatically opted in to having to answer the questions. That's legislation, I believe, that was passed in 2020.
So when they, if I could follow up, when they answer the questions, is that to change it to the new information, or does it automatically take information they may have submitted to change their vehicle registration address?
It asks you.
It asks, okay, thank you.
That's it? That's it? All minds clear? Are all minds clear? If all minds are clear, Commissioner, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman,
Thank you,
Madam
staff,
Chairman.
and so forth. And thank you, my co-chair. Yes, ma'am. Happy staff. She has a question.
No, I don't have a question.
All right.
I want to thank you for your presentation. And is that something that you could share with your presentations with the members of the
Yeah, your
committee?
staff has it. The committee
Great.
staff has it.
Okay,
Yes,
thank
ma'am.
you so much.
Thank
It's been
you.
very helpful. The questions have been helpful and reassuring, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, to the members, I thank all the members from the House and the Senate. Thank you all so much. You've been nice. Bless your heart. We'll adjourn.